Hello, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us today. Thank you so much. Really pleased that you're able to join us this week before Thanksgiving. But it's really the perfect time as we start to think about 2025, about our priorities, and what a great time to set a New Year's resolution to focus on solving involuntary churn problems. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a number of different items. I'm Steve Aronsoff. I'm the SVP of Marketing for FlexPay, the leading failed payment recovery solution. And of course, as a subscription business that depends on recurring revenue from subscribers or sustainers, there really is an ongoing need to continuously focus on reducing churn from any source. And what is often not well understood is the relationship between payments and churn. Typically, when we think about churn, we think about voluntary churn or subscribers choosing to end subscription. So we'll talk about that a little bit and explain that in more detail. I think it'll be fun to also go through some stats that we see from companies in terms of what they experience. And then we'll go through a use case of what this can look like and really paint the picture that by focusing on this problem, by deploying a best-in-class solution, that there are very, very tangible benefits in reducing churn and what impact that has on your business in the year. So let's get started. So we know that, again, every subscription business has a mandate to reduce churn and to increase retention. And really, it's a fundamental part of the business model, right? If you are acquiring subscribers or acquiring sustainers, you're doing so, you're expending resources to acquire them. There's cost to bring them on board, and advertising and promotions. And when we look at the actual flow of a subscriber, it's interesting to think about the idea that once a new subscriber enrolls, they're going to continue to bill for some periods of time. And but what's important to understand is that there is a substantial cost of acquisition. At least for traditional subscription businesses, it's very common that the average cost of acquisition for a subscriber is 4, 5, 6 billing periods just to recoup the cost of acquisition. And that's for business to consumer based business. The companies that market to businesses like SaaS software often see that the cost of acquisition can be 18, 20 months. So there's this large upfront cost just to acquire new subscribers. And until you can actually keep that subscriber billing for enough periods just to the baseline recoup the cost of acquisition, much less the cost of delivering your product or service, that subscriber remains unprofitable. So getting them to that point and then retaining them after that is incredibly important. The model, of course, is incredibly attractive to businesses and to nonprofits because of that regular sustained delivery of revenue and payments. And anything that interrupts that, it harms the profitability. I think there's actually one really neat insight that we can think about to set the stage about why retention is so tied to subscription performance and success. You think about the profit dollars that are owned in a subscription business are only coming from 100% of those profit dollars are only being delivered by subscribers that have recouped their cost of acquisition. Any subscriber that churns before that is going to be a net loss customer. And of course, there's other costs involved, but every single one of the profit dollars is going to be generated from subscribers that have been around long enough to recoup that cost of acquisition. And so maintaining the retention so that you can drive not only more revenue, but to drop more of those revenue dollars to your bottom line, to give you more resources to reinvest in acquisition, to improve your product or service, all are the currency that drives the performance of your business. So I'm sure it's not surprising to anybody that increasing retention is absolutely vital, and it should be an ongoing focus. Now, of course, when we think about a traditional nonprofit or a subscription business, it's understood that reducing churn is incredibly important. There's a lot of resources that typically invested in churn reduction programs, but typically what we see with subscription businesses is that when the description of churn is discussed, when we talk about subscriber retention, the focus is always on voluntary churn, or the cases where your subscribers are choosing to end their subscription with you. And so the tools, the systems, the process that are in place to manage this source of churn are customer satisfaction surveys, right? You want to gather feedback from your subscribers to measure their satisfaction levels, to identify subscribers at risk for churn. Customer experience programs are deployed trying to increase satisfaction, ultimately loyalty and retention. You look for behaviors that correlate with subscribers at risk. Typically, it's not uncommon to have incentives and offers to increase retention. And of course, when subscribers do asked to cancel, it's very common also that there are intervention programs that are introduced to intercept that subscriber and to try to find a way to get them to stick around, because again, that is more profitable for you. And then lastly, after subscribers have churned, there's often win-back programs trying to reactivate churn customers. So all these efforts are put in, and it involves software and systems integration and training of your teams, but it all is only addressing voluntary churn. And that's a really key insight to understand. Now, if we shift gears to failed payments, what we see in many companies is that the payments processing is often a back office process, meaning that operations and IT and finance have collaborated to put together a payment system that integrates with your billing system, that understands when it is time to hit the credit card network to be able to ask for an authorization on a credit card request. But because it's viewed as a back office problem, often the mandate is just let it run in the background and try to make that system run as cost effectively or as cheaply as possible. And when there is a problem with a failed payment, when the payment is declined by the bank that issues the cards to the cardholder, it's often viewed as a transactional problem, a one-time problem. And I cannot be more emphatic that this is absolutely the wrong way to approach this problem. The reality is that failed payments, when you think about all the remaining churn that subscription businesses have, from voluntary churn and involuntary churn, the definition of involuntary churn, of course, are subscriber losses that occur when a payment is failed and is unable to be recovered. So when you think about all the sources of voluntary and involuntary churn, failed payments in reality are usually the single largest source that remains of subscriber churn. Often it can be as high as 50% of total churn. So as we start to understand the impact of involuntary churn, what you really want to think about is really emphasizing and amplifying the importance of solving involuntary churn, because the exact same outcomes of this problem are the analogs of what happens with voluntary churn when a subscriber asks to cancel their subscription. So when you start to shift your perspective on the importance of failed payment recovery and reducing involuntary churn, the goals you should set, just like with overall subscriber loyalty and retention, is you want to be able to drive the top recovery performance and have the largest impact in the shortest amount of time on reducing involuntary churn. And then again, we'll dive into that more today in terms of what that looks like and some of the opportunities that can be unlocked. So one of the shifts that we recommend very highly for companies and for nonprofits is to start to change the approach on how the people, the teams, the organizations that are responsible for retention start to look at the business. So typically within a subscription business, you think about the subscribers are acquired, their record goes in the billing system, and every month their card is submitted for payment. As the card clears, the subscription continues, and the retention team is overlooking that entire life cycle, working to develop programs that will avoid the cancellation request. And of course, whenever the subscriber does make a request to cancel, all the intervention is activated trying to save that subscriber. Very normal, what we see within companies, and that's good. But the reality is that that exact same approach, the organizational structure, the metrics and reporting, should absolutely be applied to the cases where a payment is declined because of that large outside impact on churn. And often if the retention teams focus, if their goals and objectives, if their systems and how they organize across the company are only focused on voluntary churn, all the intelligence they have, the perspective on best practices, on improving subscriber satisfaction through the entire process, and ultimately their focus on improving retention and customer LTV, are only limited to the opportunities on voluntary churn. So our recommendation, and we've seen this as a really core best practice for businesses, is to have the team responsible for retention start to sweep out the responsibility to include the failed payment recovery process. And it's really important for a couple of reasons. What we found within research we've conducted of cardholders is that when cardholders experience a failed payment, the experience is inherently negative. It affects their brand satisfaction. And it's logical to think that this is the case. When we experience a failed payment, often what we see is that our card works everywhere else, right? We're either, our card's been declined by a subscription company, or we go, maybe very common that we'll travel for a vacation and we'll go somewhere outside of our normal city, and we'll try to buy gas and the card is declined. It's annoying. But because the card still works with other merchants, and it's only being declined by you, the subscription business, what the perception of the card holder is, my card is fine, my card was declined for your purchase, the purchase from you, it's your problem, it's your fault. So there's this inherent negative brand experience that's created. And we find that even when subscribers choose in the short term to help solve the failed payment, often it increases their risk of churn immediately afterward. So by involving the people that are responsible for retention, that are work on focusing on customer satisfaction and retention, their perspective of how to manage the failed payment process can be applied using the same types of tactics in the programs. So that team can be activated just like they are when there's a save request. I think the analog you should really think of is when a payment is failed by on a card, that it's exact same moment in time that occurs when a cancellation request is made by a subscriber. At that moment in time, the outcome is not set. You're able to either recover the subscriber and all the revenue that they're going to earn for you after that event, or you're going to lose it. So the amount of revenue that's at stake is 5, 10, 15 billing periods on the positive, or all that revenue is lost. And that's the exact same case with failed payments. When the failed payment is declined, there's a moment in time where you either recover it and all that revenue, or you lose it and you're not able to recover and all that revenue is lost. And by applying the same tactics, by, for example, minimizing the times where there is a customer outreach because of that problem when the customer is involved in the recovery process, often it is perceived as a negative brand experience. We want to avoid that whenever possible. So the retention team will bring this perspective in. They can bring their expertise and influence how the operations and the systems that are working to solve failed payments are being deployed to be able to optimize not only short-term recovery rates to its absolute maximum amount, but also focus on making sure that the subscriber experience during that process is not harmed, and that the retention of the subscriber after recovery is as long as possible, because that's how they operate. That is a more modern view of managing failed payments, but it is absolutely 100% associated with better outcomes and increased recovery and retention rates. So that's the setup for why it's so important to focus on involuntary churn, and also to start taking a different organizational approach to which teams are actually involved in the process of deploying systems and optimizing them over time. I thought it'd be fun to look at some statistics that we've seen for companies. I would say that think about these in a general directional sense. These are not the result of a statistically significant survey or a research panel, but it is indicative of what we see within companies, and hopefully these feel pretty average or similar to what your organization sees. So this is data we've compiled from companies we've talked to in the past year, and what we see is that it's very common for these companies to have an average monthly decline rate of 25%, 26%. And what that really means is that translates to a 1/4 of subscribers at risk of churn every month. I mean, it seems high, but those are the realities we have to live with. That doesn't mean they're all lost. Clearly, the failed payment recovery solutions that these companies have in place are knocking away at some of that, but those subscribers are absolutely at risk for churn. And what's also fascinating to think about is some of these companies are using fraud identification systems like Count or Signified, and they're already scrubbing out the transactions that are likely to be fraudulent. And this is the result after that. So even after some of these tools are being applied, there still is a very high decline rate. Again, that's very normal. On the average, we see companies that are on the very, very low end, a couple percentage points. We've even seen some companies as high as 60% declines, really on the incredibly problematic side. We do see that the majority of companies we're talking to have recognized the failed payment problem and are doing something about it internally. That's often the first step they take. The first generation approach is building out a retry system. Often their IT team will say, look, if we see that the payments are failing, we can just create a system that will use a rules-based approach and just retry the failed payment either every 2 days or 3 days or 5 days for some number of days. It's a good start. It won't maximize recovery, but it's a good place to start. We also see that companies very often will send all the customers who experience a failed payment over to the customer service team, and they'll reach out to them and try to involve them to help solve the problem. Again, it helps to some degree, but it's a very expensive resource to try to solve this problem. And perhaps more problematically, that's exposing a very large number of your customers to a negative brand experience that often can be avoided by direct recovery with the payment system. So that has downstream second order pain points that relate to secondary churn down the road. For those companies that are applying retries internally, the average number of retries they use is 4. What's also really encouraging, though, and we talk a lot about this idea that when you look at a failed payment or a recovered failed payment, the value of that event, the value of that recovered payment should not be looked at as a recovered payment. It should be looked at as you've just recovered a customer that was at risk for churn, just like the way that voluntary churn programs try to save customers that ask for a cancellation. The way that we bring that to life in a very tangible way is that for the companies that we talk to that measure this, and not everybody does, but it's incredibly important to do so. Once you are able to save a customer from a failed payment, measure how many billing periods they are continuing to bill after recovery. What we see is for the companies that do track that we talk to, the average number of billing periods is almost 6. So what that really means is that when the customer is recovered, it's the value of that customer is not one billing period. So, for example, of $50 per month on a subscription, it's actually almost $300. And that really, I think, reinforces the importance of optimizing failed payment recovery, because the amount of revenue that's at stake is dramatically higher when it appears on the face of it by just looking at a transaction as a failed transaction that's being recovered. That's really what we mean when we say the failed payment problem should be looked at not as an operational problem, but as a customer retention opportunity. So let's look at an example of what upgrading to a stronger involuntary churn or failed payment recovery program looks like. This is in contrast to some of the realities that when voluntary churn programs are initiated within companies, they often are protracted, right? You have to select software to complete a certain task. You have to integrate those into your systems. You have to start paying on the software on day one, regardless of how many months it takes you to deploy. There's often training and process changes that have to be rolled out across the company that takes time and effort. So you're really looking at often months and months of deployment time, and there's no guarantee the system even helps improve recovery retention. With our involuntary churn program, with our failed payment recovery solution, our installation and system integration is often a very quick process. The actual time it takes to code is usually within 2 or 3 weeks. If we're having to drive an integration into our API, if you're working with a system that we already integrated with, that rollout can take a day. It often is that quick. There's no training, there's no rollout process, there's no system optimization needs like there are with traditional retention programs or voluntary churn programs. Our system does that automatically. There's no risk. Our retention gains start to be delivered literally in the first month on recovery. And because we have an outcome-based pricing model, there's no costs that are incurred before you start earning returns. So there's zero risk on you're not earning a positive ROI. And on average, what we typically see, and I'll go through an example of how that plays out, that the thesis of this program is to really talk about the need and the New Year's resolution to start finally solving involuntary churn, or really knock it down. The benefit of focusing this as a priority for Q1 is that they can really pay out in reducing your churn rates in a very measurable way, very, very quickly. And when you think about the programs you deploy now, let's use the example that, like many companies, your total churn on a monthly basis is probably somewhere in the 10 to 15% range. And with a improvement in failed payment recovery, often that total churn rate can be brought down by 2 or 3 points within 2 months. That's the kind of speed and impact that can be unlocked by really focusing on this problem. And in the same way, when we start to talk about reducing involuntary churn, there's a very, very high impact on revenue growth, and it's high profit revenues because the revenue that's being delivered by recovered customers doesn't have to incur the acquisition costs like new customer acquisition does, the revenue from new customers. And because those customers, those subscribers continue to bill month after month, the customers that we recover in month 1 are also going to bill in month 2. So in month 2, there's a whole new group of customers that are saved from churn that otherwise would have been lost. And the revenue from those recovered customers in month 1 also bill. So you start to see this compounded revenue growth effect. And we can see that often, even within 60-day period, that the translation of reducing involuntary churn by just 12.5% can translate into 3-4% of total revenue growth within a couple months. That, again, is the kind of impact that can be unlocked. And this is the use case. Again, I think if anybody is curious about running numbers for their own business and trying to build out just an estimation of what the benefits would be for them, we're happy to sit down. You can certainly add your name into the chat, and I'll get back to you with a time that we can sit down and go through some of these numbers yourself. I think it's also really instructive when we lay it out this way to think about tracking the actual number of active subscribers that are in place before the rollout of involuntary churn program, and the tracking of it month to month afterward, and actually looking at how many customers have been recovered, what revenue is attached to those recovered customers, and tracking the direct impact on churn that is being solved by voluntary churn programs and involuntary churn programs, because that allows you to unpack the actual benefits. And often when you start to see the revenue gains and even the profit gains that is created by these types of programs by increasing retention and reducing involuntary churn, it really starts to provide the correct measurement tools to prioritize and optimize the programs to their best effect. I talked about that if payments are treated as an operational process and the only metric that is used to define the success of a program is what is the rate of improvement we delivered in the failed payment recovery, then the impact that it has on the business profitability, the impact on the retention rates that the people in this session that are held accountable to are often not tracked. And so usually the program will not work to its full benefit. So let me spend just a minute talking about FlexPay failed payment recovery solution, our involuntary churn solution. This is a good way to understand what best-in-class and mature solution looks like compared to perhaps some homegrown solutions. We have 2 solutions that we can apply. We work to serve all types of use cases. There are times where the subscriber and the cardholder will have to be involved in the process. We really try to minimize that. So our flagship solution is our AI-powered invisible recovery solution. It does work directly with the payment system. So when visible recovery works and when it's successful, the cardholder is never made aware of the process working, and they're never aware of the failed payment. All the awareness of that is completely avoided. It works in a number of different ways. There's a data packet optimization stage that works on the data that is presented initially to try to find ways to clean that up to improve the likelihood of a positive approval. We run on gateway optimization so that the way that the payment is submitted into the gateway is optimized for probability of approval. And then the AI gets involved looking at each individual failed payment. We were sophisticated enough in our data model to understand that each bank, and there's 25,000 plus banks in North America alone that issue cards to businesses and consumers, and each one builds its own logic for what is approved and declined based on their needs. And so the recovery strategy has to optimize for each BIN or each bank identification number, and it also has to work on with the reality that cards are declined for many, many different reasons. In fact, there's literally hundreds of decline codes that the banks can return when a payment is declined. So our AI builds a recovery strategy that optimizes for each individual bank. It also optimizes for each individual recovery decline reason, and delivers very, very powerful performance on the recovery, working invisibly to avoid customer visibility. But of course, there are times where the decline is going to need customer involvement. Cases like the card has expired, the card has been deactivated, and other use cases. And so when we do engage with the customer, a good way to think about why this system works differently and more effectively than customer service outreach programs is that people react in different ways. Obviously, everybody's different. And if the customer service team is simply reaching out and saying, your card was declined, can you please help us fix it? That's more of an educational based approach. And some people respond to it. You'll get some results out of it. But there are going to be subscribers and sustainers that will react in ways where, for example, our system will roll through different themes and combine different themes, working to find a messaging approach that will be effective with each individual cardholder. So there's ways that we bring in the ideas of empathy, communicating to the cardholder, this is not their problem, we're just trying to help them solve it. Some people are adverse to risk where they don't want to lose the access to the product or service. Some people are motivated by the idea that they can correct this, the idea that they own the agency to be able to solve the problem themselves. And so by rotating these different themes, always using a very positive approach, we're able to deliver not only very, very high recovery rates when the customer has to be involved, but because the experience is so positive, we provide an outcome where customer experience or customer satisfaction is not harmed, and the retention of that subscriber following the recovery process is maximized. So all those factors should be optimized and measured by you in order to get the best policy results. So we're getting to the end of the session, so let me start to wrap up. This is a good way to start thinking about how you can start to optimize the payments experience for your business and for your subscribers and sustainers. The metrics that you want to use to really evaluate what success looks like, what great looks like, is that the involuntary churn program is absolutely oriented on extending subscriber relationships. Remember, the failed payment occurred and it was not the subscriber's fault. It was a problem with the bank and a bad decision made by the bank. So we don't want to have any harm occurring on subscriber relationships and retention. The more we're able to deliver improvements in voluntary churn, we're able to start to move the needle in a very positive way on overall customer LTV. And that translates directly into improving the metrics that really matter to your business: revenue growth and the delivery of more profit dollars, more margin to your business that can be used to reapply into other ways in growth and improving the product experience and other priorities that you have to solve. And because the benefit of having an extended life cycle after recovery means that you do start to create a compounded revenue growth stream for your business. And this is why when a relatively small percentage gain in recovery rate may seem trivial and insignificant, the benefit to your business is often profound because of the compounded revenue growth delivery, because those extra dollars that are being delivered are so profitable. The companies that understand this, that really are sophisticated and nuanced about improving their payments tech stack and really maximizing the ability to reduce involuntary churn, are creating a new advantage for themselves. The reality is that this payment problem exists for every subscription business that operates in the world, certainly North America, but definitely the world as well. They're all being harmed to some degree. Their churn rates are abnormally high, unnecessarily high, because of the failed payment problem. And we really believe that within 3 or 4 years, because this problem is so profound and because it is suppressing the natural performance in both revenue and profits of every subscription business, that in a couple of years, every business will have deployed a solution, which is great. That's good for the businesses, but the companies that understand and recognize the problem now, that take action more quickly and start to bring down their involuntary churn rates, can really create a really unique advantage that's going to exist for a very short period of time. If they can have the ability to change their operating performance compared to their competitors, they can create more revenue, they can create more profits, and they can make choices to optimize their business. I mean, think about if you had a 2-year head start against your competition and you were able to fundamentally change the profitability of your business within a couple of months, what could you do with that benefit? What could you do to really start to increase the separation between you and the rest of the companies that you coexist with? That really is the promise of what can be delivered by tackling the failed payment problem with a best-in-class solution and optimizing failed payment recovery. And that's why the New Year's resolution to really take involuntary churn seriously and start to reduce it in Q1 is so crucial for your health and your performance into next year. So I've really enjoyed speaking about this topic with you. Hopefully this has been clear, and hopefully you start to have a better understanding of the value of reducing involuntary churn and how the people that are on the session that are responsible for overall retention and churn reduction programs really want to start thinking differently about how they need to be involved in the process and the management of involuntary churn and not just voluntary churn programs. I will stay on line. If you have any questions and you'd like me to dig into any of the topics more clearly, please feel free to use the chat box. And if you don't have any questions, I really thank you for joining us today. And we really want to make ourselves clear that we are here for your help. We're here to help you along your journey, and hopefully you'll prioritize solving this really crucial problem early in 2025. Thank you.